Oh, yes, I almost forgot. Thank you. For today's agenda, IREC will be presenting on improving EV charging, grid connection rules and practices. After the presentation, we can take some of what we learned and standardize the EV V1G interconnection process. And please keep any suggestions, edits, or comments on the straw proposal coming into staff at evse@dps.ny.gov, or to me personally, Lisa at lisa.rossi@dps.ny.gov. And just to go over a couple of our regular housekeeping reminders, all attendees will remain muted, and you can use the chat or the raised hand function to comment or ask a question on all the presentation, or ask a question, and then all the presentation materials and the recording link will be posted on DMM and the EviWig webpage as normal. So I just wanted to remind everybody here that we have a couple of upcoming meetings. We have one next month on the September 25th, where some developers will present on their interconnection experiences, and we will discuss section 1.1 and 4.2 of the straw proposal. There is more to be included on section 1.1 and 4.2 in the upcoming slides in today's presentation. And then on October 23rd, we currently have EPRI and GridFast that will present, and there will be a discussion on how to amend the document once it becomes standardized. And both the September and October meetings will be from 1 until 3, and we're looking forward to seeing everybody there. And ideally, after these meetings, staff and the JU will have hopefully gathered enough information to develop a draft standardized statewide process that involves both upstate and downstate utilities, which can be shared with the members of the EVIIWG prior to the state procedure process. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mari Hernandez and Midat Mafazi from IREC. Thank you. And Mari, can you share your slides, or do you need me to do it?
Yeah, I can share them. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, let me
I have to unshare, I think.
do that now. Okay.
Uh-oh. Okay, are you all set?
Yeah. Okay. Can you see the slides now?
Yes.
And you're seeing them, are you seeing them presenter or?
Oh, now they're presenter, yep.
Okay. Great. Thank you everyone for joining, and just wanted to do a quick intro into what we're going to be discussing today. My name is Mari Hernandez. I'm the director of the regulatory program at IREC, and I'm presenting today with Midhat Mafazi, my colleague who is a regulatory program engineer at IREC. I know Lisa told me that the slides would be shared after the presentation, so I know we usually get questions about that, so that those should be coming after the presentation. And then I think we're going to suggest holding questions until the end. I'm not going to be watching the chat, so unless there's something that needs to be clarified along the way, maybe we'll just save questions for the last part of this. All right, so let me move this forward. All right, so IREC is the Interstate Renewable Energy Council is a 501c3 nonprofit organization whose mission is to build the foundation for rapid adoption of clean energy and energy efficiency to benefit people, the economy, and our planet. So we work to build that foundation through workforce development strategies, local clean energy solutions, and state regulatory engagement. And I know we've worked with some of you, so as you may know, in the regulatory space, our team works collaboratively with other stakeholders across the country to develop and share best practices related to interconnection, grid modernization, and distribution system planning. We regularly engage in state regulatory proceedings as public interest interveners. We provide technical assistance to other stakeholders, and we develop resources to streamline the grid integration of clean energy technologies. So we've done that through our model interconnection procedures for distributed energy resources, and then we have a ton of resources on our site. I actually didn't include the website here, but it's just irecusa.org. All right, go to the next slide. I included this quote here because IREC is coming at this from a similar perspective in terms of thinking, how can we standardize the process and how can we apply lessons learned from DER interconnection? So I love this quote from Katie Sloan. It's from 2019, but basically talking about how rooftop solar interconnections initially took a few months, and now in many cases, especially for smaller systems, can take a few days. So we may not be able to get to a few days for charger installations, but how can we make interconnections more routine and learn from what we've already learned on the DER interconnection side? So our interconnection work has typically focused on the generation side. So because we hadn't worked directly on the service connection process or the load connection side, we wanted to first learn from folks who were installing chargers and hear about their experiences. So in 2021, we identified a handful of EVSE providers and who are working in multiple states and who represented a broad share of the US EV charger market. And then we conducted a survey to identify the challenges they were facing, particularly with level 2 and DC fast chargers, and then also to see if they could help us to highlight good practices that were emerging to address those challenges. So this paper that came out in June of 2022 is part of a series of Paving the Way reports that IREC published in that same year. The two other reports focused on different topics, including one on the status of V2G standards at that time that MidHot wrote, and the other one was on enabling equitable EV shared mobility programs. And then I also want to mention here that, this perspective that was shared in this report is just from the EV charging provider side, but we're currently working on a DOE-funded project that EPRI is leading that will be sharing research and findings from interviews with both utilities and customers. We're particularly looking at the small fleet and multifamily housing customer perspective. And then we're going to be developing a resource that will similarly identify service connection challenges and solutions. And so Lisa actually mentioned that presentation coming up in October. So EPRI will be leading that presentation, but we're supporting that project. Oh, and I will make sure after this that I share the direct link to that paper. I have it right here, but I just am not on the right screen to be able to do that. But so the challenges identified by the respondents to that survey in 2021 kind of fell into these three main categories: interconnection process barriers, and here we're talking mostly about the process that is directly with, related to utilities, and then difficulties obtaining easements, which have some relation to that utility, partnership on how to make sure that gets done, and then slow permitting processes, so mostly on the AHJ or authorities having just jurisdiction side. And here is a simplified list of challenges that were identified through the survey. We're going to go through each of these at a high level and then discuss some of the emerging practices that were highlighted by respondents, as well as a couple that we would add if we were writing this today. I also wanted to mention the outcomes that kept coming up related to these challenges, which were timeline delays, higher costs, process uncertainty, and then ultimately slower overall deployment of chargers. I couldn't find that like a great graphic to show this, but that was the best I could do in a short amount of time. But basically just that all of these challenges are kind of leading to some of these other things. And one of the things we think about a lot in terms of interconnection is, we see interconnection as the practical side of some of these big policies that are developed. How do they actually get implemented? And it's through interconnection. So that is another reason we wanted to address, interconnection on the load side. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to MidHot, who's going to go over the next several slides.
Thanks, Mari. Sound check. Can you hear me? Thank you. Yeah, so for our approach here for the next few slides is for each challenge that was reported, we will cover sort of emerging best practices. So for this one, the shortage of dedicated utility staff and resources that's specifically assigned to EV infrastructure projects was a common challenge identified by many of the survey respondents, who noted that utilities that lack such specific EV staffing may struggle to efficiently process and manage applications, which can lead to delays and inefficiencies, basically hampering the overall progress of EV infrastructure deployment or development. So to address the barrier, respondents highlighted a few emerging best practices. The first one was providing upfront customer advisory service to assist applicants in understanding application requirements and determining the eligibility for incentives, if any. By providing clear guidance from the outset, customers are better equipped to complete their applications accurately and efficiently, reducing the likelihood of delays or rejections. The second one was designating a single point of contact for each project or applicant in order to guide them through the process and provide regular updates, which basically simplifies communications, as customers have a direct line to a knowledgeable representative who can address their concerns, answer key questions, and provide timely updates throughout the process. The third one was allocating dedicated engineering staff and construction crews to work with customers on the design, scheduling, and the completion of utility construction work, which signals a better sort of workload management where parties can better anticipate potential issues and deliver more reliable outcomes. And then finally, the development of an online customer portal emerged as a valuable tool for improving transparency and communication. Such portals allow customers to track the status of their projects, providing them with up-to-date information on progress, milestones, and any potential delays that may come up. Next slide. So the challenge noted here was that states and local jurisdictions without specific policies or programs that are designed to decrease the cost and time involved in connecting EV chargers to the grid may have difficulty meeting electrification goals and future EV charger demand. So to address this barrier, folks identified that states should adopt programs that allow for more cost and time efficient charger interconnections, such as make-ready programs, which can reduce infrastructure cost for applicants, and if completed during the construction of new buildings, could help to streamline part of the interconnection process at make-ready sites. Other programs that I can maybe mention here like the contribution in aid of construction, CISC, that are used to recover payments that exceed the standard cost covered by utility, basically factoring future revenue from the new services, where utility apply the CISC to offset the cost of installing new chargers, requiring developers to contribute to the cost of new infrastructure that exceeds what the utility would normally cover. Additionally, beyond the scope of the report, so if we were to write the report today, basically, we would also add proactive outbreak planning is another emerging practice that can significantly support the widespread adoption of EVs and also DERs. This approach involves anticipating future demand and strategically upgrading the grid before the need becomes urgent. Basically, by planning and implementing upgrades in advance, utilities can better manage the increased load from new technologies prevent potential bottlenecks that may come, and continue providing that reliable service expected from customers. Next slide. So the third reported challenge is the extended lead times for utility equipment upgrades. Utilities often order essential equipment upgrades such as transformers on as-needed basis rather than maintaining a stockpile. This practice can significantly extend project timelines, adding weeks or even months to the completion of infrastructure projects. Two emerging best practices that were noted to address the challenge were, number one, maintaining essential equipment inventory. So ensure that essential equipment such as the transformers and commonly needed upgrades equipments are readily available. By keeping these items on hand, which can significantly reduce the time required to implement infrastructure upgrades. The second one was monitoring upgrade timelines and identifying delays. So implementing a system to track the duration of each infrastructure upgrade that is associated with EV projects. And by analyzing the time taken to complete upgrades and identifying any recurring reasons for delays, utilities can streamline processes, optimize resource allocation, and improve overall efficiency in future projects. So tracking this data helps in setting realistic timelines for project completion and addressing any bottlenecks that may arise. Next slide. For the fourth challenge, survey respondent also shared that utilities do not always provide applicants with clear timelines and expectations, especially related to construction work, which can make scheduling difficult and delay charger installations. When it comes to emerging best practices, two were noted. One was establish clear interconnection process steps, meaning to enhance transparency and efficiency. Utilities should clearly define each step that is involved in the interconnection process. This includes requiring the IOUs to regularly publish average timelines for completing each step, which helps applicants understand what to expect and allows them to plan accordingly, thereby reducing delays and uncertainties. Number two was develop comprehensive applicant guides. So create detailed guides for applicants outlining every step of the interconnection process. These guides should specify who is responsible for each task at every stage of the process. Providing this information upfront ensures that applicants are well informed and can navigate the process more smoothly. Again, going beyond the paving the way paper of the report, if you were to write that report today, we will also add, or we want to stress on the importance of publicly reporting on timelines annually. Here, we are not just talking about overall process timelines, but rather capturing the timelines of the process steps as well, because there are many steps that are out of the utility's control. This can help regulators and other stakeholders understand where there may be any bottlenecks in the process and ultimately help to focus efforts on the most pressing interconnection issues. Next slide. This one is a common challenge on the DER side as well. Utilities may not provide easily accessible load data or other services that could help applicants identify favorable locations for chargers before submitting that application. This absence can hinder the efficient planning and placement of charging infrastructure. Once again, two emerging best practices were brought up. First one was requiring utilities to publish these maps, which are vital for applicants to evaluate grid limitations and identify regions with sufficient load capacity. This map offer crucial insights into where additional infrastructure may be necessary, enabling applicants to make informed decisions prior to project initiation. However, one note is that for applicants to rely on these maps for project siting, utilities need to update the data frequently enough to convey actual grid conditions and must adapt data validation practices to ensure the accuracy of the data. Number two was providing upfront evaluation services across various potential sites can greatly aid applicants by helping them pinpoint the most suitable locations for charger installations before submitting a service request. This proactive strategy not only enhances the site selection process, but also helps streamline the overall project timelines, minimizing delays and any potential expenses that may come up. An example of this is provided in California by SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility. Next slide. Mari, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Midhat. So the next one we highlighted in the paper is on performance measures. And at the time, there weren't any jurisdictions when we wrote this paper that we were aware of that were doing performance measures specifically on interconnection timelines for EV chargers. So, so it's still the case that in most jurisdictions, utilities are not incentivized or mandated to meet minimum timelines to approve applications, study projects, or complete construction, which can lead to slower processes and uncertainty about project completion timeframes. So a way to address this would be to adopt performance incentives and or penalties to encourage more streamlined interconnection processes. As I said, this wasn't something that we had seen, at least on the EV charger side. We had seen it in Hawaii on the DER interconnection timeline side. So very excited to see that there had been one implemented in the Con Ed territory. But that Hawaii practice was a pretty innovative performance incentive mechanism that also included penalties based on whether the utility met annual targets for average timelines, in addition to financial rewards when they did meet those timelines. And this is the last slide. I combined both easements and permitting on this one. So on easements, respondents noted that there can often be a disconnect between signing a lease with a site host and obtaining an easement. It's usually kind of at least a two-step process, and that can, cause further delays. So to address this, respondent said that utilities should publish approved language that could be used within the lease agreement with site hosts. That way, utilities can help to eliminate separate negotiations over the appropriate easement terms and other acceptable language that may be included in that easement agreement that wouldn't work for the utility. And then on permitting, we heard from respondents that obtaining permits for electrical and construction work can be a lengthy process, which we also hear that on the DER side as well, especially when the permitting authority lacks clear policies and practices that can shorten timelines for EVSC projects. So for this, this is more with the local government side, but AHJs can provide dedicated resources for applicants and adopt expedited review policies, similar to some of the, dedicated resources we mentioned for utilities. Kind of having those types of things available would be helpful to guide and to guide applicants and help them navigate the process. And then at the state level, legislators can consider model EV ordinances to streamline the approval process at the local level. And then a couple of our final slides. On the next two slides, I listed all of the recommendations that may be relevant to this working group and attempted to identify whether it was something that had been adopted or maybe in development. So green indicates that I'm aware that it has been adopted. Orange indicates a topic that may be in progress or something I was unsure of, but maybe it had been mentioned by Con Ed either in the straw proposal or during a working group call. And then the blue circle with a question mark just means I'm unaware of whether it's been adopted or not. So for advisory services, we know that this is in effect for fleets. I wasn't sure for all make-ready program projects. I think that was mentioned in a presentation by Con Ed that was the intent that hopefully it would get there. I wasn't sure if it was already happening and with whether all utilities were also working on that. Single point of contact, similar thing. I know Con Ed said that they have already implemented this. I wasn't sure about other utilities. And same with the online customer portal. And then just wasn't sure about engineering and construction staff being dedicated to these projects. We know that a make-ready program is in effect. So, that was pretty clear. On proactive upgrade planning, we know that had been happening through the medium and heavy duty vehicle docket. We saw that there was a new proactive planning docket that was just announced this week. So that was exciting. And then I've got two screens here and one's kind of behind the other one. On the performance measures, we know that Con Ed has the transportation electrification earnings adjustment mechanism. So it's in orange just because it's Con Ed only. So question marks on the top view on easements and equipment lead times. Just wasn't sure if any of those things had been implemented. We didn't talk about cost recovery in the paper related to, kind of stockpiling upgrade equipment and how, when that equipment would need to be used to be able to be recovered by utilities. So that's something that I was unsure of and hadn't looked into for New York, but I know other states have addressed this in some way, particularly in Colorado. And then grid transparency, we know that all utilities have load HCA maps. I just noted that it was evolving here because it's been evolving over time. Midhat, I'm not sure if you want to share anything on that, but feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so there are different maps offered by the IOUs. There's the PV maps, there is the ESS maps, and then there's the electrification of the EV maps. And the PV maps are more matured compared to the load maps or the electrification maps. So we're going to see some evolution before they get to the point that they are the same. So what you have there is appropriate.
Great. And Midhat is involved in the HCA forum, so has been working to help identify improvements through that working group. And then on the providing upfront site evaluation, I noted fleets here. I wasn't sure if this was going to be something that could be provided for all projects or all make-ready program projects, so that's the reason for that. And then on process clarity, I know for publishing guides with defined steps, estimated timelines and responsibilities, this was noted in the proposal as something that Con Ed was hoping to get to. So I said that had not happened yet, but I would love to know if that's not true. And then publicly reporting on timelines, we know this is done through the EAM, and there was the recent report that came out, the annual report that came out in July on Con Ed's earnings adjustment mechanism timelines. But that, again, that's just Con Ed, and it's not on all process steps. And then the last slide, I'm just going to go through a couple of other considerations that may be specific to this working group and the straw proposal. So the first is how to think about and balance the flexibility that Con Ed mentions a few times in the straw proposal, like moving certain projects forward based on the customer's timeline and needs, regardless of whether it was submitted after other projects within the customer's portfolio. And so balancing that flexibility, which we think is a good practice and can be helpful in a lot of ways and beneficial to the customer and hopefully to the utilities process as well. So balancing that with a desire for some accountability. So we think that a good way to understand how those flexible practices may be speeding up the process is to have utilities track and report on interconnection timelines. This will also be helpful as more and more, applications are coming in to understand, are they able to, are those flexible practices continuing to work the way that they're supposed to? And, where are the bottlenecks throughout that process? So as we mentioned before, Con Ed's transportation electrification EAM is helpful for that purpose, but that only applies to Con Ed, and then it's limited to the overall timeline from application to site energization. And then as Midhat shared earlier, we recommend first defining the process steps and then reporting on the timelines annually. And Midhat, I'll let you cover that second part.
Yeah, I can cover that. So in its STRO proposal, I believe Con Ed stated that they have an innovative internal tool designed to expedite service determination for load requests that meets specific criteria, effectively bypassing the traditional full engineering review. We think this fast-track approach could be a game changer and should be woven into the interconnection procedures as an alternative simplified review track. To make this effective, it's crucial to clearly outline the criteria for qualifying a project for this expedited and simplified review process that may offer quicker timelines. And then additionally, offering detailed results from these reviews could significantly enhance transparency in the load review process. This clarity would not only help customers grasp why certain upgrades are necessary, but also provide actionable insights on how to potentially cut costs and speed up installation. For example, a thorough breakdown of engineering review results might highlight ways to lower expenses through strategies like adapting a managed load profile or phased project implementation, allowing parts of the projects to become operational before completing all necessary upgrades. Yeah, and that's it.
Great. Thank you all for joining again, and thanks for the opportunity, Lisa, for allowing us to present here today. Happy to answer questions or take them offline. You can reach out to both me and Midhat.
We do have a question from Zach. Zach, can you unmute yourself? Oh, did you lower your hand?
It's still up. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, and thanks, Marie and Midhat, for the presentation. One thing that I've seen from IREC in the past from their batteries project related to energy storage is a real critical focus on flexibility of energy storage, and I think there's some interesting parallels to EV charging sites, in particular sites that maybe have multiple EV chargers and depots or workplace charging, or other facilities that might have several chargers and might have some flexibility built in there. In the batteries project, there's this thing that's stuck with me, which is this sort of 3-step process on how to enable sort of controlled systems. And I know, Midhat, you just mentioned a moment ago the value of those sort of load management plans. There's 3 steps that were in the batteries project. The first, I think, is identifying the acceptable control methods. The second is updating the screening and study process to account for those controls. And the third is allowing for sort of midstream or in-flight system design changes during the review process. So my question I'm building to here is, would IREC recommend those same 3 steps for EV charger interconnection as it did for export controlled storage systems? Would those recommendations also be identified as sort of a best practice for EV chargers, especially in those multi-charger sites where there might be some flexibility?
I can start, Murray. Thanks for the question, Zach. I think that there's a lot of resemblance. I can't say for sure until we put everything to test and discuss it step by step. But I think that there's a lot of resemblance to it. First of all, I think recognizing what appropriate methods are applicable to the load side, it will be the first step. Basically, recognizing those methods will make it easier for to review and study this project, but basically streamline the whole review process. And that's how the DER realm has gone about it. Obviously, there are some of those methods are more applicable to smaller systems than bigger system. For example, when you talk about smaller projects, well, are you likely to use a power control system versus a relay? So that's a question of the specific project and how they go about it. So I think, again, I'm not being very specific here because we haven't put it to test, but I don't see a reason for going away from an established process already, and whether those individual methods will be applicable to the load interconnection realm, that those can be decided later on. But rather than going case by case for each review, it's more applicable to start recognizing these select methods that will be applicable on the load side. I know UL is doing some work on the PCS side to make sure that to replicate the generation side of certification for load. So that's an item that can be discussed further. And of course, there is whether the utilities allow just hardware controls versus hardware plus software controls. So that's an item that can be discussed, and whether certification labs should come into play into this. That can be discussed. I know I'm not being very specific here, but I think the way batteries went about it, I don't see a reason to change. Basically, going through the same process seems like the appropriate pathway. But Mari, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thanks, Midhat. So I think it's a good question, because what we've heard from utilities is that there are still these separate processes for load and generation, right? So we're considering, the service connection process kind of its own process. And then if storage is added, then we have to think about it through the SIR process. And there may be some overlap, which I think maybe utilities are still trying to figure some of that out, and how that can be streamlined so it's not two processes in sequence, but maybe kind of the overlapping of part of those review processes. So I think definitely, I would just say, I think Midhat's right. You have to think about like use case and all of that kind of stuff within this, but because I think sometimes when we're thinking about it from the DER side, there may be a slightly different use case that we're considering. But I still think it's totally applicable to look at those practices from practices that we've developed through batteries. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that was a 3-year funded project through DOE, where we worked with EPRI on another DOE project where we were leading it to put out some, to address challenges, and many of those were technical related challenges, and some of those related specifically to export controls with DER systems. So I think those would still be applicable. One is I did a quick check because through our resource Bring the Grid, we graded New York on its DER interconnection rules, and I know those are specific things that should be added to the rules, and that's defining those export control means that are acceptable, and then making sure those are in the rules clearly, and that they can be used when in terms of controlling the exports, and which that also whether that can be the hardware versus software, like Midhat was talking about. So yeah, I would say that would definitely be applicable here, and could help with that, storage review side if you're trying to add storage to manage load.
May I ask a follow-up question? This is Zach again from BGIC.
Sure.
Maybe more of a question toward DPS staff and the joint utilities. So with the recent order related to the load management technology incentive program, it seems like the question around acceptable methods of, I'm going to say the word import control for lack of a better term here, but acceptable methods for whatever the EV charging equivalent is of export control, it is sort of mentioned in that order. I think the joint utilities are directed to coordinate on eligibility and identifying what those acceptable methods are. And then of course, there's also the funding itself and the incentives for the program. And the piece that I'm wondering whether, and here's my question for the JU and for DPS staff, is this forum, the EVWIG, the right place to talk about the other pieces of the apparatus, namely updating the screening and study process to account for these flexible sort of load control methods, so that, identifying acceptable methods is one piece, having funding to help offset the costs of installing those methods is another piece, but there's still this process piece that there needs to be more clarity around. So it seems like we're kind of building toward that, and again, Midhat, your recommendation at the end there from IREC, I think points to this, but is this an element we'd want to explore more in this EVWIG or EVIIWG to try to create a lot of clarity around the actual process that accounts for these different controls? In other words, is there a fast track treatment or not for these when there are acceptable control methods in place?
So I don't know if anybody from the JU wants to jump in, but I think, if I understand your question correctly, I think the answer is yes, that we should explore, in fact, I think I do talk about it in this presentation, but for the flexible and new technology, I think we need to develop a way to standardize that process as well too. But again, it's just for the V1G. Anything that's like feeds back to the grid would have to go through the SIR process.
Yeah, understood. My question
Yeah,
was just
okay.
around V1G, like power control systems, right? The development that Minat was talking about from UL, that's not specific to export. There's an aspect of that that's focused on load control.
Yeah, so I would expect that we would want to explore that and try to develop a way that would be, standardized across the whole utility and how we're going to address, especially if we do get a standardized document with new technology coming as quickly as it does, we're going to want to have a way that we can interpret it and put it into the document, the standardized document. I don't know what we're going to call it yet, but so that everybody can be on the same page and follow the same rules and have each step defined, and the new technology can be used across the state. I don't know if anybody from the utility wants to jump in and say anything, but that's what I think.
Yeah. Hi, Lisa. This is Rick from NYSEG and RG&E. I think, the idea of flexible interconnect is certainly something that has become an emerging issue, and one that I'm sure all the utilities are looking at individually. I would just suggest that for the document we're looking to arrive at, I think by the end of the year, it may not be enough time for us to include, specific guidance or guidelines around flexible interconnection. I mean, I would propose that perhaps the initial document is just that, an initial document, and perhaps we could identify areas that need further investigation and documentation, investigation, research, et cetera. That's just my view, and I'd certainly be open to any other comments from any of the other utilities on the call. But I think, just to summarize, I think flexible interconnect may be very aggressive right now.
Thanks, Lisa and Rick. That's really helpful. And Rick, to your point, I'd say for VGIC's part, we'd be happy to serve as a resource and a contributor for any language around flexible service connect or flexible interconnect. So, we think it is critical at this time. To your point, it's certainly an emerging topic and it comes up more and more often. So would love to explore maybe offline some solutions and ways we can get more on paper sooner rather than later. So there's clarity for customers, for installers and developers and folks who are establishing the relevant equipment and hardware and software stacks to enable this. So thanks again for the thoughtful answers and thanks again, IREC, for the presentation.
Does anybody else have any other questions or comments or suggestions or?
Yeah, this is Rick again from NYSEG and RG&E. I'm just gonna, follow up on my comments since Zach, just to respond to Zach. So I appreciate the fact that the VGIC feels that this is something that is a critical component, but I think the factor involved here that makes it difficult to really get into any depth on in this, let's just say, for discussion purposes, iteration of this document is each of the utilities' individual interconnection policies and how flexible interconnect is built into those policies and procedures. That's just not something that happens overnight, So that's the perspective I'm coming from. Not that I don't think it's worthy, but that there's a lot more involved than when we start talking about flexible interconnection.
Hey, this is Jake from Central Hudson. If I may just sort of piggyback on Rick, very much agree. And I might even ask DPS to consider some of the other venues where I know the flexible interconnection topic is coming up, because I recognize it is very important for this topic, and it's timely, as Zach mentioned, for the LM tip. But I know there's other places where sort of the flexible interconnection topic is coming up with DPS. So perhaps worth just additional conversation on the right place to have that conversation. So we're making sure we're bringing all the right stakeholders and folks into that conversation too.
Thanks, Rick and Jake.
Question, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
Just in response to Jake's comment, not to put this on the spot, but could you identify what are some of those others? Because I know for VJC's part, would love to make sure we're tracking all the right venues where this is coming up.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking from the perspective of some of the more technical working groups, and maybe just the ITWG, which I think you guys are already plugged into as just a potential starting point. But we can have those conversations here. I think just calling it the EV interconnection working group is potentially a little misleading if we're going to expand that, is all I'm thinking.
Yeah, fair enough. Maybe a question to the DPS staff again is like some clarity. Where will this be addressed, so we can just decide like one specific venue to show up and talk about this, whether it's here or that ITWG. And I want to admit, like, it's possible that's already been clarified, and I'm personally not in the loop, and that's very much possible. So if we can just get like clarity, and maybe it doesn't need to happen on this call, but at some point, where will we be able to address the process for flexible service connections to, for example, the fast track treatment, or and of course the LMTIP addresses a lot of elements, but I think there's still some gaps that we might want to address as we look to achieve greater scale and ultimately to achieve our goals for deployment of the infrastructure we're looking to get out there in a timely manner.
I agree, Zach. We have Cole asking a question right now. Before I respond, we'll see what Cole has to say.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I was just going to chime in support of Zach's point and respond to what Jake had said on, the scope of this working group. I mean, so with Environmental Defense Fund, EDF was also advocating for flexible interconnection being included within the scope of this working group. And I would just say, from our perspective, flexible interconnection is not some, wholly different process outside of the normal interconnection process for EVs, but it's just a different set of assumptions and processes for getting customers interconnected. So to us, we do see it as in scope here, but I mean, I would also echo Zach that, if it's staff's view that it isn't in scope here, then I think it would be extremely helpful to have a clearer picture on where these topics are going to be addressed, because we're seeing it come up more and more in New York and really across the country. And I think this is a really good time early on to tackle this issue and kind of set a standard that can be useful elsewhere as well.
I sort of agree, Cole. I do think we should discuss it a little bit more in this group. I can get back to everyone in this group to see if my colleagues feel the same, but it does feel like it is something that we should be discussing and standardizing across the state with all the utilities. So I guess I'm going to have to get back to you to make sure that I'm on the same page with the people that I work with. So stay tuned.
I just have one comment.
Go ahead. I don't know who's talking. Go ahead. Richard.
This is Richard from New York Best. No, those are great points from Zach and Cole. Currently, like, we've had this conversation in the past, and we've been leaning towards doing the interconnection work for flexible interconnection in the ITWG meeting. And I know Jason Pazzi, who led that, has been in contact with this working group, and they're trying to incorporate the flexible interconnection process for EVs in the ITWG. But I think there still needs to be more conversation, because not everyone's aware in the working groups. And obviously people on this call don't know. So that's something we're working towards defining. But I believe the ITWG moving forward is going to start to take more of an approach in flexible interconnection. But I think it'd be valuable to keep that on the radar and make sure that progress is being tracked between the groups.
Okay, thanks for that, Richard. I would definitely touch base with Jason on it then, and if it's being addressed, so we'll figure it out.
Okay, yeah, that would be great, just to have another conversation.
Yep.
Thank you.
Rick,
Hey,
you're yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't raise my hand. My name is Dhruv Patel. I've been closely involved in the ITWG. But I just want to say, like, this has been a hot topic for the past year or so. But we at least lack industry expertise at the group, and it would be great if folks here could reach out to Jason or me if they wish to get more engaged. But other than that, I think I would also suggest TPS staff to think more holistically here on how this relates to the other proceedings like Grid of the Future, and if there's a a higher, a greater proceeding that this could be addressed in. if we do want to discuss this outside the working groups. Just a suggestion.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to jump in really quickly in response to that, and in response to several of the questions. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nicole Solis with GPS staff. It sounds, I think we can all agree that a lot of these issues, they coincide. They are involved in multiple proceedings that are going on. Someone mentioned the LM tip before, the Load Management Technology Incentive Program, which we're not sure if everyone is aware of. And then, of course, the Grid of the Future proceeding was just mentioned, which we're not sure, if everyone here is aware of. And so it sounds like maybe we should follow up with the people on this call just to let everyone know, hey, these are the other proceedings that we have going on where this particular issue, is also related, or where questions and comments might be better suited to this particular proceeding, just to make sure that everyone is aware kind of all of the proceedings that are going on and can stay aware, of where best to provide feedback. Does that sound good, Lisa?
It sounds great, Nicole. We can get back. I think we have a couple more hands, Rick Rosa and then Katie Zellner. Rick, did you have your hand raised? I don't see it raised anymore.
I did. I'm sorry, I was on mute. Lisa, thank you. So, as you go back and discuss this further with your colleagues, staff, I think there's two issues that have come up here, and I want to make sure that we distinguish between those two. So, and because one does not necessarily and may not necessarily tie directly to the other, and it's this idea of flexible interconnect and then a fast track for flexible interconnect. Okay, and so I think we need to recognize that those are two distinct different things. I think there's a flexible interconnect discussion, and then there's a separate discussion around fast tracking, and whether because someone has a flexible interconnect opportunity potentially, that means that is going to somehow reduce a process that is already fairly complex. So I just want to make sure you're clear about that when you go back, because our goal here is to come up with some type of a standardized process, and we're trying to really work our way through that process and how we might standardize it. So I think introducing a conversation around fast tracking at this point is premature, even in the case of where it might apply to a flexible interconnect. So I just wanted to raise that point, for clarity. Thank you.
Rick, can you just clarify what you mean by fast tracking? Sorry, I didn't understand that.
Well, that goes back to some comments that Nick had made around flexible interconnect, and or Zach, I'm sorry, not Nick. Zach had made around flexible interconnect, and then being a fast track path. And I think it was also in the presentation provided by REIC. And I just don't want to mix those two together. So.
Sorry, but when you're saying fast tracking, do you mean fast tracking the process of like the development of flexible interconnection agreements, like fast tracking it, making it a priority of this group, or fast track in the sense of a customer using flexible interconnections as a faster path to getting interconnection versus a customer not?
Sure. Okay, that's a fair question. So I think either or. So whether it is in in either of those situations, I think at this stage, we're looking to identify the processes across the JU and standardize those processes. And I think introducing any discussions around fast tracking at this point is early. So.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Katie, will answer your question and then we'll move on from this. And Katie, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Oh, there we go. Yep.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Great. I just wanted to, I liked Nicole's suggestion around making sure that kind of we're sharing resources across participants. And I think, you know, in that spirit, also want to make sure that before sort of corralling the conversation in one direction or another, we make sure that we get the voices of a different category of stakeholders, the developer stakeholders, which I think you have on the agenda, Lisa, for next month. So just wanted to point that out for participants that we have kind of a whole other set of perspectives up on the agenda next month.
Yep, that's great. Thanks for reminding us, Katie. I think I'm gonna bring up the rest of our presentation. Just give me a minute so that I can pull it up and we'll get through this. I think we have I just want to thank Mari and Midat for their lovely presentation. It was full of good and useful information. I think that we can definitely add to our process. And now I have to try to share my screen. So just give me a second. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
We can.
Okay, good. So I just, we're gonna bring everybody back to what our main goal is, and it's just that we have an order from the commission. It's a midpoint review order. And these are the directions. It's that the stakeholder process shall advance and address, among other issues, transparency, the queue backlog, wait times, and application development, and establish a standard process for the interconnection applications, which could be shortened and ideally streamlined, and the intake of applications driven by electrification and CLCPA. And once the EVIWIG determines that the proposal is final, staff will submit the proposal for public notice and comment as step toward the finalization of a statewide approach. So in order to create this statewide standardized process for the EV V1G queue management and interconnection applications, the EVIIWG or EVIWIG will continue to analyze the straw proposal. After the draft straw proposal is finalized, and we have a few months on this, the next steps will be that staff will SAPA the document to get any additional comments. And during that comment period, if any comments are received, staff will schedule the meeting to address if necessary. And the comments will be incorporated into the document if required. And once that is complete, staff could re-SAPA the document again. Now, I'm just going over what we see as what the next steps will be. And I know that we still have quite a bit to work on. So we cut to the standardizing of the non-standardized areas. So at the last EVIWIG, the upstate utilities identified section 1.1 and 4.2 as the main disparities between the interconnection process. Section 1.1 2 discusses moving projects forward in batches to manage the queue in high volume application period. And section 4.2 deals with program teams for forecasting a ceiling of expected inflow to service determination teams. Additionally, upstate utilities have not implemented an eligibility assessment early on for interconnection requests, such as Con Edison has done. And this came from the JU. It shows the, it was from the last meeting, which was not last month because we didn't have one with the month before. It shows the E1, V1G interconnection flows between and the difference between the upstate and downstate utilities and what is also similar with the states. So this is, I think, what we need to work on to get into standardized process. So the discussion, as noted earlier in the slide, the EVIWIS task is to standardize the non-standardized areas, and most notably sections 1.1.2, batching and reprioritizing order of applications within customer portfolio to be sent to the service determination team, and section 4.2, the EV team forecasting service determination team, which is attributed to less of a surge in the make ready program applications for upstate utilities right now compared to Con Ed region and the differences in the infrastructure. And I think this is where the IREC sort of best practices presentation that was just happened is going to be helpful, because I think in some of these we can define each step and the estimated timeline and the application guides and the responsibilities. But I also want to think about, from this entire group, are there additional exceptions or unique attributes that should be included in the discussion to create standardization? And we don't need the answers today, but I think we need to think about it and add it so that we can have a complete document. So I came up with some key questions and discussion points to be identified. And again, these don't have to be discussed right now unless we want to, but I think it's something to think about for the future. So when we start developing, a more finalized document. So so at the next meeting, I'm thinking that we can discuss these, the list of topics and questions here that would help developing a standardized process, and to address any key differences identified in the flow chart provided by the JU. Some questions to think about that I thought about, there may be more, you can let me know, include at what point will batching be implemented, and is there a certain number of requests that will trigger the batching process? And I think that's more for the upstate utilities, since Con Ed already developed this, but eventually and hopefully, the upstate utilities will need to also figure this out. So if there's a certain number where the batching process starts to be implemented, I think we need to know that. And how do we address any comments that may materialize once the document is final? And how would we address any new technology into the process? And here comes, the flexible interconnection might be one of those that we need to at least formalize in the document, even if it's discussed in a different working group, maybe just even stating something like that, but at least directing so that individuals and developers and whoever else knows what to do when this when a new technology comes on the market. And again, are there any other topics that need to be included? If we don't, again, we can think about this. You can email me or the EVSE webpage in order to, get these conversations moving. And then does anybody else have any questions? And I really would like to thank Mari and Midat for their lovely presentation. It was super, super helpful, and I really learned a lot from it. And I'll be looking at this more closely to see how it can be implemented in our working group. And I can't see hands if anybody has anybody. Katie, go ahead. We can't hear you again.
Hi, Lisa.
Yeah, hi.
Sorry, I have a two button unmute process. The delay.
I hate those.
So I think, yeah, just, you know, an update, the JU has been working on making some modifications to the straw proposal so that, you know, it reflects what's being done across the state. I do think there are a few examples where, and batching is one of them, where our straw proposal reflected an approach, a best practice that could be adopted under certain conditions, and it's more of like one tool in a toolkit. But I think that it's also okay to have, you know, especially something like batching that's like a very operations management perspective, to have the individual utilities determine when that when they reach that high volume period, you know, when it's an appropriate practice to implement. So just wanted to call out that there are some practices included in the straw proposal that Con Edison put forth that are sort of like a template that another utility may copy, but only when it makes sense for their internal engineering review processes and their resources and the, you know, just sheer number of projects they have coming through their queue. There are a lot of factors. So wanted to share that, and kind of similarly on the the forecasting point, because there is because Con Edison first looks at incentive eligibility before kind of passing the project on to the service determination teams, the engineering teams. That's when we were able to do that kind of forecasting for our engineering teams. But because the upstate utilities really parallel track that process, it's almost kind of like a moot point. So it's not like one way is better than the other. It was just, you know, one practice that Con Edison put forth that doesn't really map to the way the upstate utilities are currently operating and doing so, you know, without a wait list. So just wanted to clarify that. I'll give the upstate utilities a chance to chime in if I missed anything.
Yeah, Katie, this is Josh Kaplan from National Grid. And I think you pretty much summarized it up pretty well of some of the ongoing discussions that we're working on within the JU to sort of align around the straw proposal. And I guess I'll leave it to you if you want to share sort of an update on the straw proposal's current status in terms of drafts and such.
Yeah, sure. We're for the rest of the working group, we're, you know, at the point where we're very close to alignment across modifying the proposal so that it is something that each of the utilities can adopt, and then we'll have our legal teams review, and then Lisa will hand it over to you for consultation with staff and go from there. So hoping to, you know, do that in the next month, across the next one.
That sounds good. I will be sharing it with the full group here, though, not just staff.
Oh, okay, yeah, no problem.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, how exciting, that's fast. I don't think, unless people have anything else they want to discuss right now, I don't have anything else. So we can conclude the meeting unless I see any hands raised. Go ahead, Katie. I see your hand.
Sorry, I just wanted, yeah, it's me again. I just wanted to add one thing related to what we heard from Mari and Medhat, and thank you so much for the presentation and pulling in the survey work that you've done over the past few years. Super helpful to see. I also really liked your color coding as your recommendation. So that's really helpful. I did just want to share, you know, since Con Edison is in New York, the utility that has the transportation electrification timeline EAM, I wanted to add that one thing that's been really helpful about that is, you know, it gives us the structure to measure the end-to-end timeline, and having that end-to-end perspective is helpful when you take stock of the fact that these projects can really vary from project to project. You know, a curbside L2 project is very different than a DCFC 10 or 15 plug project out by the airport. And they're going, each project based on both the capacity and the customers that it's trying to serve is going to run into different places in the timeline where they can move faster or slower. And so having this end-to-end approach has allowed us to say, okay, on a project-by-project basis, where are we able to shorten things? Where are we able to parallel track? So we can see that, you know, in things like where we're looking at a project and we're comparing to the paving schedule for the Department of Transportation. There might be a project where we say, based on the paving schedule, you know, we're going to be able to save a lot of time if we can greenlight the bringing of cables on the utility side construction earlier than we would normally. So we're not looking at a situation where we're having to ask DOT if we can tear up a street that they just repaved. So that's an example of where it's, you know, specific to that project, specific to the paving schedule, and, you know, we're working hard to be flexible, and it comes out, the gain comes out in the overall timeline rather than the gain coming out in like a specific step in the timeline. So I know obviously talking about construction examples, they're complex, but even so, even though I'm giving a complex example, I wanted to give that example as a place where the win is in the end-to-end versus in a specific phase of the timeline. That's it.
Thanks, Katie. Not seeing any other questions. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. I thought this was a very good and informative meeting. So I think we can conclude it now. And I would again like to thank Mari and Medhat for that lovely presentation and for everyone's participation. We will meet again next month, I think on the 25th. So we can finish up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.